Chapter 1. First Breath. The last thing Sidious remembered was the lightning, then unleashing a torrent at Luke that was pouring from his hands. He remembered Luke writhing beneath it, then Vader's grip, then the fall after being thrown down the reactor shaft, then nothing. Darkness. As awareness slowly returned, it did not come as thought, but as weight. Pressure bore down against every surface. A cold density resisted his movement. Next came sound, distorted and distant, as though carried through thick water. There were rhythmic pulses that echoed faintly, which were irregular at first, then gradually became steadier. In a remote government black site facility far from any major cities, various military officers, soldiers, and aides rushed through the corridors. Over the commotion, one of the officers said, "Contact Colonel Franklin now!" Almost immediately, an aide was dispatched. Colonel Franklin had just finished hosting a dinner party. The guests were leaving one by one, thanking him and his wife for the evening. They stood at the entrance of their home, quietly pleased with the success of the night. Colonel Franklin and his wife had spent some time together after the festive dinner party in the living room den, but he had moved to his study after his wife turned in for bed a couple of hours earlier. Colonel Franklin was up studying some reports and documents before he was going to bed himself. That's when the phone in his study started ringing. For a brief instant, he thought to himself, who could be calling at this hour? If it isn't the president, someone is about to have a very, very bad morning. With a rough, deep, begrudging tone, he answered the phone. Colonel Franklin speaking. This better be important. The panicked and frantic aide stammered. Good evening, Colonel Franklin. Sorry to disturb you at this late hour. The captains and lieutenants asked one of us aides to contact you. This is top priority, and you're needed here now. Colonel Franklin spoke, saying, All right, slow down, son, and tell me what happened exactly. The aide replied back, Well, that's the thing, Colonel Franklin. We don't know what happened, but our systems are flagging multiple alerts from an unknown location. Methodically, Colonel Franklin replied, Send me the details. I'll review them while I'm in transit. The aide responded with a militant, Yes, sir. I'll have the details sent over right away. After hanging up, Colonel Franklin went upstairs and gently woke his wife to inform her he was leaving. Being the colonel's wife and married for over 20 years, she had come to accept the demands of being married to a military man. She slightly turned her head up and gave a sleepy, Okay, hun, see you when you're back, then laid her head down and went back to sleep. Colonel Franklin started to get ready, and by the time he was done, his car was outside. Then there was a knock on the door. Colonel Franklin went downstairs and answered. When he opened the door, it was Lieutenant Chambers standing there, greeting him with a salute. Colonel Franklin, unbothered, simply said, That's enough, Chambers. Let's go. Then he started making his way to the car, with Lieutenant Chambers falling in behind him. From the back seat, Colonel Franklin asked, Chambers, if everything I'm reading in this report is correct, we have bigger problems to worry about. This requires total blackout. This is strictly need to know. Understood? Lieutenant Chambers firmly said, Understood, sir. As they continued to make their way to the base, the two of them resumed speaking on planning, strategy, and procedures. After a while, Lieutenant Chambers followed up, saying, We'll be arriving in 20 minutes, sir. They had already been driving for more than half an hour. Colonel Franklin replied back, Make sure there's a transport ready and waiting to go, so once we get there, we can immediately head to the black site. Lieutenant Chambers responded with an affirming, It's already prepped and waiting, sir. In the back seat, Colonel Franklin didn't respond, but he had an approving look on his face. As they arrived at the massive military base, they didn't waste time at security checkpoints. Lieutenant Chambers held both his and Colonel Franklin's military IDs out the window. The guards took a quick look at the IDs, saluted the car, and waved them through. Lieutenant Chambers drove straight to the helicopter that was waiting for them. Colonel Franklin and Lieutenant Chambers got out of the car and quickly boarded the helicopter, taking off to the black site. After flying for another 45 minutes, they arrived, quickly disembarking from the helicopter. The lower-ranked soldiers saluted Colonel Franklin and Lieutenant Chambers as they made their way inside. Aside from the soldiers who were there for security, There weren't many research staff at the black site. More research staff were scheduled to arrive over the coming weeks and months, all of whom would be chosen by Colonel Franklin. Colonel Franklin and Lieutenant Chambers were now in the briefing room that hadn't seen any use for decades. They were getting the latest briefing from the members of the temporary research staff. In the main research facility, where the tank was housing the clone body, the instruments and life support systems started to beep steadily, in addition to showing increased brain activity. As the briefing progressed, midway through, one of the junior research assistants came in, getting the attention of the most senior researcher, and whispered something to him before leaving. The senior researcher looked at Colonel Franklin, Lieutenant Chambers, and the other senior researchers and said, "Colonel, please come with me. I was just informed there have been some new developments." Immediately, both Colonel Franklin and Lieutenant Chambers stood up, with Colonel Franklin saying, "Show me." The group filtered out of the briefing room, making their way to the lab where the tank housed the clone body. As the group made their way to the lab, the researchers discussed the potential scientific breakthroughs and implications. While Colonel Franklin listened somewhat intently, he felt like he was being drawn to something, but he couldn't place his finger on it. For now, he kept quiet. Once the group entered the lab, both Colonel Franklin and Lieutenant Chambers were slightly taken aback by the sheer size of the tank and the lab. The research staff broke off from the group and went to their designated areas. A few of the senior and junior research assistants called Lieutenant Chambers over to review some data. Colonel Franklin was walking slowly and methodically around the huge circular tank, observing and taking it all in, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. He couldn't explain it, but he felt as if the presence in the tank was reaching out to him, and he had never experienced anything like this before. He knew one thing for sure. Since he and Lieutenant Chambers got there, he had felt its pull. Stopping in front of the tank, he closely observed the clone's features. It did not look like anyone famous or well-known. While everyone was busy running around or involved in some sort of scientific discussion, including Lieutenant Chambers, Colonel Franklin believed, for a brief second, the clone took a very subtle, almost unnoticeable breath. And although they were closed, Colonel Franklin also believed he saw the slightest eye movement from the clone. In a moment of uncertainty, Colonel Franklin paused and slightly narrowed his brows, as he realized he was the only one in the lab to notice.